Hey guys, tonight we drift toward the edge of Scotland's northern winter, where the wind has a grumpy personality. The waves slam against rock like they're running late for their own arguments, and you're probably regretting not wearing thicker socks. You stand on a coastline that's rugged enough to look like it was carved by someone in a hurry, with sea spray colder than the water in your own refrigerator. This place doesn't ask for patience. It just asks how long you think you can handle it before running back inside for a hot drink you definitely overpaid for. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, just breathe. Allow your eyes to grow heavy and your body to soften, and let the hush of winter carry you to sleep. Let's begin. You walk across the sand, still wet from the tide that just retreated, leaving behind seaweed like someone forgot to clean up after a beach barbecue. The cold here is different. It doesn't sting. It clings. It hangs onto you the way a curious story sticks to your memory even before you know where it's going. You're not here for postcards or vacation selfies. You're here because there's something in the air, an old myth pacing beside the waves, waiting for you like a story that finally wants to be believed again. Scotland has many legends tied to the sea, not the kind full of sword fights or pirate treasure maps, but something quieter, older, more patient. The kind of myth that just sits in the water for centuries, humming to itself, waiting for a moment when someone like you shows up and accidentally listens. Historians still debate how much of these stories were inspired by real sightings of seals, human migration across the North Sea, or just fishermen who were bored after too many nights stuck in storms with nothing but whiskey and imagination. Academics like to argue about origins. They always do. Yet none of them can explain why this particular tale still feels like it breathes. You stare out at the horizon, noticing how the ocean here doesn't shimmer playfully. It broods. Its surface looks heavy, as though it remembers everything, including things you never lived through. Winter waves break against black rock, and every splash feels like a sentence being erased and rewritten. The water has its own language, and you're trying to understand it without asking it to slow down. You start to think maybe those old fishing communities weren't just making things up for entertainment. Maybe they saw something. A seal bobs through the water near the shore, the way seals always do, as if they're judging your life choices. You've probably heard that people used to believe seals could shed their skin and become human beings. You might roll your eyes today, but back then, the sea controlled everything, from livelihood to loneliness. When you depend on something that unpredictable, it makes sense to imagine it has secrets. And maybe it does. After all, there are records from medieval Scotland describing selkies, mysterious beings who lived between worlds. Scholars are still divided over whether these writings were symbolic metaphors about outsiders or literal claims from people who swore they saw skin left on rocks. Old paperwork doesn't give straight answers. It never does. You crouch near a cluster of kelp washed ashore, its slick surface reflecting dull moonlight. A fragment of folk memory seems to rise with the sound of the waves. Somewhere between fishing nets, cold nights, and the constant company of seals, a story was born about a coat. Yes, a coat, capable of giving someone not just a different appearance, but an entirely different existence. A coat that wasn't made of wool, leather, or human effort, but of skin belonging to the sea itself. The wind pushes at your back like a warning and an invitation at the same time. You realize you don't need heroic adventures to meet something mysterious. You just need to be willing to stand still in the cold long enough to listen. Because here, in a place where winter presses against everything it touches, the ocean keeps an account of every secret it has ever taken, especially the ones that tried to escape. And tonight, you're about to hear one. The wind shifts as you continue along the shoreline, and you get the feeling the ocean has just leaned in closer, like it's about to whisper something you're not entirely prepared to hear. Your boots sink slightly into wet sand, soft enough to betray your every step. And there, half hidden beneath a twist of seaweed, you notice something entirely unremarkable, yet strangely magnetic. A piece of skin. Not flesh, not fish scales. Just a strip of something smooth, silver gray, the exact color of moonlit waves. It looks like a coat, or the ghost of one. You pick it up carefully, expecting it to feel slimy or cold. But it's surprisingly warm, like it remembers the body it used to belong to. You've probably never held an object that felt both alive and forgotten at the same time. In Scottish coastal folklore, selkie skins weren't just clothing. They were identity, biology, destiny, and passport rolled into one. Lose it, and you lost your world. Keep it, and you owned the life of someone who shouldn't belong to you. Some historians believe these skins represented marriage contracts in fishing villages, where women's autonomy could be stripped away by men who controlled resources. Others argue this was mythic reinterpretation of Norse sea traveler narratives. And some just shrug and say people back then blamed seals for everything, including loneliness. Scholars love disagreement the way seals love fish. You hold the strip of skin a bit too long, as though hoping it might offer an explanation. Instead, a louder wave slaps the rocks behind you, like applause for your confusion. You don't know it yet, but this object you're holding would once have been the most precious thing to someone. Because in those stories, a selkie coat wasn't simply an article of clothing. It was closer to a soul. Without it, a selkie became trapped, not by chains or cages, but by the very idea of humanity. Imagine being bound to a world that isn't yours, not by force, but by someone's decision to keep something that never belonged to them. A coat worth a life. A coat worth freedom. A coat worth waiting centuries for its return. You gently set the fragment down as if it might wake up. The tide creeps closer, possessively reaching for it, as if reclaiming something you shouldn't have touched. That's when it hits you. This strip of coat feels incomplete, like you're holding a single sentence torn from a book no one's allowed to read. Maybe that's how most legends work. Fragments washed ashore, leaving you to guess the rest. You step back, letting the water take it. The fragment rolls away like it's eager to go home. The sea accepts it without hesitation, not a splash out of place. And you realize the ocean behaves differently with things that belong to it, almost respectfully. A marine biologist might offer an explanation involving currents, textures, or buoyancy, but no scientific study can explain why the moment feels ceremonial. The debate would probably continue until someone gets hungry and decides to leave the conversation unresolved. As usual, that coat, or what remained of it, was a reminder, not of loss, but of choice. Something taken, something hidden, something powerful enough to change a life. Maybe a fisherman found one long ago. Maybe he kept it. Maybe he didn't realize he had taken more than an object. The cold air presses harder against your face, and you understand. Stories don't start with heroes. They start with mistakes. Tonight, you've witnessed the first one. The sea turns quieter as you walk inland, as if it has already told you more than it meant to. Even the seagulls seem to hush their usual complaints, giving you a rare moment of silence. You pass low wooden buildings stained by salt and wind, each holding the faint smell of fish, smoke, and stories that no one bothers writing down. The village looks worn, not broken, just tired, the way something gets after spending too much time being useful. You spot a small cottage near the shore, its chimney leaning like it's trying to rest against the wind. Nothing about it stands out. No grand decorations, no bold stains of color, not even a proper garden. But homes like this weren't meant for show. They were built to withstand storms, boredom, and livelihoods entirely dependent on whether the sea felt generous that week. In this place, luxury isn't gold, it's dry firewood. Inside this modest home lived a fisherman, one of those men whose names rarely show up in history books. Not because he didn't matter, but because he didn't leave behind the kind of legacy that scholars like using to win academic arguments. Yet sometimes the most unremarkable person ends up with the kind of secret that reshapes a myth, not through bravery, but through one quiet, selfish decision. Imagine him walking along the same shore you just stood on, the same chill in the air, the same dark waves pushing themselves toward land, the same seal watching from the water with eyes a little too focused, like it understood exactly how unpredictable humans are. In the older stories, that's when it happened. A fisherman stumbled upon a coat, smooth, glistening, and inexplicably valuable. And instead of putting it back, he kept it. Not out of malice, but out of curiosity. Maybe even loneliness. The wrong kind of need can look a lot like opportunity when no one is watching. Scholars today still debate whether these tales were meant to criticize marriage customs, symbolizing how women could be taken without consent. Some argue it reflected an older fear of being bound to a life you didn't choose, especially in isolated coastal communities. Others believe the fisherman's actions were treated as morally ambiguous on purpose, leaving him neither villain nor hero. And there remains a smaller group, usually folklore purists, who insist everyone's overthinking it, saying the story is exactly what it sounds like. A guy took a magic coat, and everything that followed was his fault. Academics aren't known for subtlety when they think they've solved a mystery. Picture the fisherman holding that silky skin, not realizing he's holding someone's entire existence. He doesn't know he's sealing fate. He doesn't understand that the coat isn't just valuable, it's irreplaceable. And he certainly doesn't grasp that choices made in isolation can echo across generations, like waves that don't know how to stop breaking once they start. He hides the skin because that's how mistakes begin. Quietly. He tucks it into the safest place he can think of, believing safety and secrecy are the same thing. And in that moment, without ceremony, without witnesses, without even understanding what he's done, he rewrites the boundaries between land and water. You stand outside the cottage now, feeling the weight of a decision that happened long before you arrived. A decision that doesn't feel dramatic or monstrous, only ordinary. And that's what makes it unsettling. Big legends don't always start with thunder. Sometimes they begin with a lonely man who thought no one would notice if he kept something he shouldn't. Stories grow from choices like that, and this one is about to grow teeth, and searching for something she no longer has, the way someone might search for a word they forgot mid-sentence. She is not afraid, not angry, not desperate. She's simply incomplete. You realize that being stranded on land wasn't a punishment. It was a misunderstanding, forced into permanence. The fisherman, the one who made the choice you can't stop thinking about, sees her first. The legends always say he approached with awe. But awe is a polite word for curiosity, dressed up as admiration. Maybe he didn't understand her silence. Maybe he thought silence meant agreement. Maybe he mistook vulnerability for invitation. The stories don't give him cruelty, only ignorance. That's what makes it more human, more believable. She walks into the village like a tide sneaking past barriers. People notice her beauty, her quietness, the way her eyes seem to hold things she never says out loud. No one asks questions that matter. They see a woman without a past, without possessions, without a name. They make assumptions the way people always do when they meet someone who doesn't fit neatly into their world. Historians argue whether Selkie brides were symbolic of women taken into coastal communities from outsider groups, absorbed without choice. Was she a stranger accepted too quickly, or a person never truly seen? That question still circles academic conferences like an overly caffeinated seagull refusing to land. You can almost hear the village's unspoken conclusion. Someone found her, so someone must claim her. They don't ask where she came from because they don't want an answer. Answers lead to responsibility, and responsibility is inconvenient, especially when the ocean is right there, listening. As she stands among them, fragile, barefoot, present, her gaze drifts to the waves that refuse to look back. For a second, you see her expression shift, subtle as the tide pulling at a shell. She doesn't belong here. She knows it. The sea knows it. But no one else notices. The quiet woman without a story simply becomes part of theirs. you realize something. Legends are not built from magic. They are built from silence. And hers is loud enough to swallow a lifetime. Days pass in the village without ceremony. People tolerate the weather because they don't have a choice, and they tolerate newcomers for the same reason. You watch as she gradually takes up space inside the fisherman's world, not as a guest, not quite as a wife yet, more like a quiet question no one is brave enough to answer. Life here is built on simple routines, mending nets, repairing boats, drying fish, and trying not to get swept away by storms that behave like moody co-workers who show up unannounced. In a place like this, familiarity is more valuable than beauty, and silence can pass for agreement. She learns the rhythm of the village without ever claiming it. Her presence becomes ordinary, not because she changes, but because people stop wondering why she came. Humans are like that. We normalize anything if we look at it long enough. Even miracles become chores. Even strangers become household furniture. Anthropologists today sometimes argue that Selkie myths housed the anxieties of communities who relied on outsiders, traders, travelers, migrants, for survival, yet feared their influence. Others say these stories reflect how women historically entered new families through marriage, often losing their names and histories, and inevitably, someone always stands up in a lecture and insists the whole thing is just about seals because humans can't resist projecting drama onto animals. There's no consensus. There probably never will be. You observe her moving through the fisherman's cottage. She sweeps the floor, collects water, and listens to the crackle of firewood as though she's learning another language. She adapts because adaptation is the only way to exist here. The fisherman treats her with kindness, but it's a kindness shaped by possession, the kind that assumes gratitude. His affection grows from proximity rather than understanding. It isn't malicious. It's simply convenient. And convenience has shaped more marriages than romance ever has. Eventually, a ceremony takes place, though calling it a wedding might be generous. A few neighbors gather, more curious than celebratory. Someone brings bread because food counts as approval. Someone else awkwardly coughs through the vows, which are short enough to fit inside a sigh. There are no flowers, no music, no polished rings, only a mutual decision carved quietly into the wood of daily survival. Two people will live together, therefore it must be marriage. This is how unions form in places where love isn't promised. It grows the way moss does, slowly, in silence, without asking permission. You sense that she doesn't resist. She doesn't cling. She simply participates, like someone acknowledging weather they can't control. She doesn't smile, but she doesn't refuse the life being assigned to her. It would be easy to call her passive, but that word doesn't belong here. She isn't passive. She is patient. There's a difference. Passivity is surrender. Patience is waiting for the truth to surface. And somewhere in this house, tucked away out of sight, lies the hidden coat, her identity, her memory, her exit door. The fisherman keeps it locked away as though storing something fragile, while never questioning what fragility means. He doesn't know that what he's protecting isn't an object, but a possibility. He doesn't realize that what's hidden is not a treasure. It's a sentence. Every evening, the tide fills the shoreline with a voice that only she seems to hear. The ocean keeps speaking, even when no one listens. And she listens, even when she cannot answer. Marriage doesn't change the story. It only raises the stakes. You feel that in the stillness of her gaze, in the way she observes water, the way others observe prayer. Love may exist here. It might even grow, but it sits on sand, and sand shifts. You already know what happens to homes built on shifting ground. They don't fall because they're weak. They fall because the tide eventually returns to claim what never belonged to the shore. Time moves differently near the ocean. You don't measure it by days or seasons, but by tides and storms, by whether the fish are biting or the clouds feel heavy enough to break. In this village, years can pass without anyone noticing a change. The way a slow tide reshapes a shoreline just by showing up. You watch her settle into married life, not as someone transformed, but as someone conserving energy, quietly enduring, quietly observing, quietly remembering. Her human existence is a surface, not a home. She and the fisherman build a rhythm together, though rhythm might be too generous a word. It's more like parallel movement. He repairs nets, she dries them. He brings home fish, she salts them. They share a roof, the way two ships share water, close, but never touching. There's tenderness in his gestures, but tenderness built on expectation feels more like maintenance than love. You notice how his kindness assumes permanence, as if caring for her entitles him to her presence. He believes he has rescued her from loneliness, without realizing she never asked to be saved. In the long winters, when the sea is too violent for fishing, villagers gather indoors to share stories, as humans have always done when faced with boredom and bad weather. They talk about shipwrecks, sea monsters that look suspiciously like poorly described whales, and ancient kings who supposedly ruled from underwater palaces made of coral and kelp. Some say Selkie brides bring good luck to fishermen, ensuring a plentiful catch. Others whisper that marrying one invites storms because the sea resents being robbed. Folklorists still argue whether these tales were warnings about exploiting nature or romantic exaggerations meant to justify unpredictable fishing seasons. The debate ends the way many debates do in small towns. When someone's drink runs out, she listens to every story, never correcting anyone, never revealing what she knows the ocean actually holds. Silence becomes her contribution, a kind of unspoken diplomacy with the world she doesn't belong to. You realize that she isn't trapped only by her missing coat. She's trapped by patience, by politeness, by not wanting to wound the humans who don't understand they've wounded her. People start to say she brings good fortune. They marvel at how fish seem to find the fisherman's nets more often now. They praise her presence as if she were a charm, a blessing, a useful mystery. In coastal communities, utility is the highest form of acceptance. If you are helpful, you are welcomed. If you are too mysterious without offering anything practical, you become a threat. She's fortunate, they say, because she's valuable. Whether or not she's happy doesn't enter the conversation. She bears children, something the legends describe almost casually, as though motherhood were simply another task on her list, like washing dishes or gathering firewood. But children change the myth. They anchor her to the land with bonds she didn't choose, yet refuses to break. Her children are not symbols. They are real, warm, loud, curious, and utterly human. They are the sea and the shore put into motion, belonging to both, yet destined for neither. Historians often debate whether this part of the story reflects cultural blending among coastal populations, with families formed from different origins, carrying conflicting identities they must learn to navigate. Others say the imagery of half-sea children represented anxieties about belonging in isolated communities. And then, predictably, someone will argue that people simply liked telling stories about babies with special abilities because humans can't resist mythical genetics. There is no scholarly consensus, only waves of interpretation hitting the same rocks again and again. You watch her cradle her child, eyes soft, distant, listening to something beyond the walls. She doesn't resent her human life, but she doesn't forget her ocean life either. She lives in two worlds, the way a tide lives both on land and in water. And you feel the pull inside her, not a longing to escape, but a longing to exist fully somewhere. Yet every choice she might make would break something, the land, the sea, or both. Patience, you realize, is not passive. It is pressure. It is the tide waiting for the moon. One day, the moon will pull hard enough, and the sea will answer. You notice it for the first time on a morning when the tide is dragging itself away from shore like a sleepy giant deciding it deserves 5 more minutes. The beach is damp, quiet, and mostly pretending nothing unusual ever happens here. Typical coastal denial. Yet you can feel something humming beneath all that calm. It's the kind of sensation that makes you pause mid-step, the way you might freeze when you think you've left the stove on. Except here, the feeling comes salted, wind-shaped, and tied to something half-forgotten. And that's when your attention drifts toward the fisherman's cottage, specifically to a part of it you've somehow avoided noticing until now. The place where a chest sits hidden, tucked beneath floorboards that creak like they're keeping secrets on purpose. You've known for a while now that the fisherman carries more hesitation in his posture than any one man should. It's like guilt has weight, and he's been shouldering it for years, trying to disguise it as fatigue from work. But fatigue doesn't make someone avoid eye contact with the sea. Fatigue doesn't make a man flinch when a seal barks out in the distance. Fatigue doesn't leave a chest-shaped indentation on the edges of his conscience. No, guilt has its own shape, and apparently here, it looks exactly like a wooden box that shouldn't exist. You don't see the chest directly, not yet, but you feel its presence the way you feel the ghost of a wave brushing your ankles when you stand too close to the surf. The cottage itself seems aware of it. The walls lean inward, boards bow slightly, and the shadows cluster thick around that particular corner, as if trying to hide something from both light and judgment. You can't tell if the chest is ashamed, or if the house is ashamed for it. And then there's the woman whose existence is still half a miracle and half a question mark, carved out of sea mist. She moves through the cottage with that calm, tide-like rhythm, her steps quiet, her hands gentle, her eyes old in ways that make you think you're the one who's temporary here. She doesn't seem aware of the chest, or maybe she's painfully aware in the subtle, resigned way someone remembers a dream they aren't ready to retell. You watch the way she glances sometimes toward that corner, then looks away, like her gaze is skipping stones across memories she refuses to pick up. The children, though, they're different. They carry the energy of currents that don't ask permission to shift course. They run, they tumble, they fill the cottage with laughter that doesn't quite echo right, like sound bending underwater. And they never step on that floorboard. Not once. Kids who otherwise treat the house like their personal obstacle course magically avoid that one plank, skipping over it with instinctive precision. You could chalk it up to randomness, but you've seen too much by now to keep believing in coincidence. Children sense things adults train themselves to ignore. Maybe they hear something faint, a whisper, a heartbeat, a memory tapping upward from below. It's only when the wind sharpens in the afternoon, carrying a strange metallic edge, that the tension becomes undeniable. The fisherman comes home later than usual, sea spray clinging to him like accusation. He pauses in the doorway, shoulders heavy, eyes flicking once toward the corner where the chest sleeps. For a moment, you think he's going to break, that he might actually confess to the woman, to the children, to the house itself. But he doesn't. Instead, he presses his lips together and walks past the weight of his own choices like someone avoiding a sore tooth. You don't blame him entirely. Human guilt has messy edges. It frays, it tangles, it tries to hide itself while hoping to be forgiven anyway. But the sea has its own expectations. The sea remembers. And the chest, whatever's inside it, is part of a contract he never should have entered. You can almost imagine the contents even before you see them. A shape made of silence and consequence. Something that smells like brine and fate. Something that was never his to keep in the first place. You find yourself thinking about the moment he first took it. Not in detail, that memory belongs to him, but you reconstruct the outlines. A beach, a decision made too quickly, then clung to too stubbornly. A man who wanted companionship so badly, he convinced himself destiny feels like opportunity. And somewhere in all of that, a chest that wasn't truly a chest until he needed one. A container for both the treasure he claimed and the crime he pretended he could live with. You wait until the house quiets that night, the way all houses eventually do when its people are sleeping or pretending to. The children breathe softly. The woman moves in her dreams like someone remembering tides. The fisherman sits awake longer than he should, staring at nothing, listening to everything, and you stay still, feeling the air around that hidden corner thicken. like the secret is swelling within its wooden confinement. It hits you, slowly but surely, that the chest isn't just holding something, it is holding someone's truth hostage. And that's when the conflict starts tugging at you, not gently, but with the persistent pull of a low tide insisting it's time to go. You stand in the middle of that little cottage, in the quiet dimness, caught between loyalty to the family and loyalty to the story that existed long before them. Because here's the uncomfortable part. Treasures and crimes are sometimes the same object. What he stole gave him a wife, children, a life he never would have dared dream of. Yet the same theft carved a hollow place inside all of them. A place shaped like something missing, something trapped, something yearning beneath floorboards in a chest that shouldn't be here. You don't know what will happen when the chest is finally open, because you know it will be opened. Secrets like this don't stay buried forever. They swell with time, gathering pressure like a storm offshore, waiting for the moment the wind shifts. And it's shifting now. You can feel it in the way the waves crash harder at night, in the way seals linger longer offshore, in the way the woman's silence feels more like anticipation than absence. For now, the chest remains hidden, but it feels less hidden every minute. You can sense its impatience. Objects linked to destiny don't like being locked away, and this one has waited long enough. You stand in the darkened cottage, feeling the weight of it all settle around you like wet sand. You don't touch the chest. You're not supposed to. But you know it's there. You know what it means. And you know that sooner rather than later, someone is going to lift that floorboard. And everything quiet in this house will finally speak. You feel the storm before you hear it, the way you sometimes sense a migraine creeping in long before the ache shows up. The air on the Scottish coast thickens, heavy and metallic, like the sky is chewing on its own thunder, debating whether to spit it out. Even the gulls take the day off, never a good sign. They sit hunkered down on rocks, feathers ruffled, looking like disgruntled landlords staring at tenants who've missed one too many payments. And somewhere deep inside that gathering gloom, you feel a tension that isn't human at all. It's memory. Old, ocean-shaped memory, rolling in from somewhere beyond the horizon. You step closer to the shoreline, trying to understand the restlessness threading through the waves. The water keeps shifting subtly, a ripple here, a shiver there, like it's pacing back and forth, muttering to itself. Normally, the sea carries the indifferent mood of a creature too ancient to care about your mortal dramas. But not today. Today, it's alert, focused, searching. By afternoon, the wind is sharpened enough to sting. It sweeps through the grass, rattles the cottage roof, and whistles around the edges of stones worn down by centuries of storms. The clouds pile up fast, thickening into something almost architectural. You can practically see their structure, the scaffolding of an old grudge being rebuilt in the sky. And it hits you with a clarity that's half dread, half awe. This storm isn't just weather, it's a response. Inside the cottage, unease spreads like spilled ink. The fisherman keeps stepping outside, then back in again, uselessly pretending he's checking something about his boat. You've seen this pattern enough times to recognize denial in motion. He's not worried about the boat. He's worried the storm has found him. The woman moves quietly, but her quiet has changed. It feels tighter around the edges, and her gaze keeps drifting toward the window as if her name has been called by something she can't ignore. The children sense it too. They lose their usual wild, tide-born energy, turning softer, stiller, like small creatures noticing a predator in the distance. And then the first wave hits. Not the usual crash or friendly slap of the shoreline, but a heavy, resonant strike that shakes the air. It's the kind of wave that announces itself like someone knocking on a door too hard, like the sea making sure you understand this is a visit, not an accident. You step to the window and watch as the next wave rolls in, taller, darker, lifting with a slow, deliberate curve, as though the ocean is inhaling deeply before saying something important. That's when it becomes clear. The sea is looking for the chest. The realization lands with the weight of a dropped anchor. Of course, the ocean would remember. Of course it would wait. Of course it would keep score. Human beings like to think nature moves on, but nature doesn't forget. Not when something sacred has been taken, not when the rhythm has been broken. And this storm, this is nature tapping its fingers on the table, reminding the world that debt has due dates. Wind begins tearing across the coastline, tugging violently at your clothes, your breath, your balance. Rain arrives in sudden, sharp sheets, soaking through everything in seconds. It hits the earth with a force that makes you think the sky has finally decided to wash the truth out into the open. Waves grow larger, rising like something sentient, their crests glowing faintly white in the storm-dark afternoon. Every time one crashes, you feel the sound in your ribs. Inside the cottage, the mood fractures. The fisherman paces, tries to distract himself with chores that don't need doing, then stops altogether, staring toward the corner where the chest sleeps beneath the floorboards. You see it then, clearly, painfully. The storm is dredging up not only memories but conscience. Guilt tends to whisper. Storms tend to turn whispers into megaphones. The woman stands still, hands resting lightly on the table, eyes half-lidded, as though listening to a language no one else can hear. And maybe she is. Maybe the storm is speaking directly to her, calling her home or calling her out. The house feels too small for her in this moment, like she's expanding inwardly, waking up piece by piece. Her silence crackles the way electricity does right before lightning strikes. When lightning finally hits, splitting the sky open in a jagged white vein, you feel the ground tremble. The children cling to each other but don't cry. They stare at the door, at the storm, as if something familiar is out there. Something that scares them and comforts them all at once. You glance outside and see seals gathering offshore, their dark heads bobbing in the churning waters. They shouldn't be here in a storm like this. They should be sheltering in kelp forests or hidden coves, not throwing themselves into waves big enough to swallow small boats. But they're here anyway, circling, weaving through the surf with purpose, and each time a flash of lightning illuminates them, their shapes seem bigger, more certain, as though the storm itself is feeding their presence. You start to understand. The sea isn't merely searching for the chest. It's mourning what was taken. It's demanding return. This storm isn't random violence. It's recollection with teeth. Meanwhile, the cottage shakes with every gust. The roof groans. The windows rattle. The air inside grows dense enough to taste, metallic and ancient. You feel something like a pulse through the floorboards, faint but steady, like the chest itself is responding to the storm's call. And you begin to feel torn. On one hand, you're human. Humans protect their homes, their families, their fragile illusions of control. On the other hand, you can't ignore the ocean's plea. There's a kind of integrity in the storm, a raw honesty humans rarely manage. It doesn't hide what it wants. The fisherman knows it too. You see the resignation settle over him like a wet coat. He slides down the wall until he's sitting on the floor, staring numbly at the boards covering the chest. There's no point pretending now. The storm has ripped the veil away, leaving nothing but consequence. As the night deepens, the storm grows stranger. The waves begin to roll with a rhythm almost like breath. The wind carries a sound that isn't quite wind, something like a low hum, something ancient, something personal. You don't know the language, but you know the meaning. It wants back what was taken. And the worst part? A quiet part of you agrees. Because storms don't come looking unless something truly important is missing. And this storm knows exactly where to find it. You hear it long before you understand it. At first, it's just a thin, wavering sound threading its way through the leftover storm air. A sound small enough to slip between raindrops, yet sharp enough to snag on your thoughts. You tell yourself it's only the wind practicing its off-key whistle routine against the rocks. But the more you listen, the more it refuses to stay dismissed. It shifts, deepens, gathers itself into something unmistakably alive. And then you realize the truth. The seals are crying. Not barking, not grunting, crying. Their calls rise and fall along the bruised coastline, carrying the weight of something more than animal instinct. There's longing in the sound, and grief, and a strange kind of recognition that prickles across your skin like static. Even after the storm has staggered away, leaving puddles in the grass and a sky that can't decide if it wants to clear, that lament keeps threading through everything. The wind, the tide, the memory of thunder. It's the kind of sound that travels straight through bone. You step outside the cottage because you can't not. The air smells of wet stone and churned salt. The kind of scent that makes you feel like the world has been scrubbed down too aggressively. The shoreline is littered with seaweed pulled loose by last night's rage, and somewhere offshore, dark silhouettes bob just beyond the breakers. The seals have returned, more of them than before, dozens, maybe more. They move with a purpose that feels ceremonial, circling, diving, reappearing, all while their voices rise in unison. And those voices, those impossible, echo-heavy cries, hit you with the unsettling sensation that you're eavesdropping on something meant for another realm. The sound is too mournful for the morning after a storm, too organized to be random, too emotional to be instinctive. You've spent enough time here now to understand that the sea holds its own kind of court, its own rituals, its own grievances. And right now, the seals sound like witnesses testifying. Behind you, the cottage remains unnervingly still. The fisherman hasn't stepped out since the storm ended. He's inside somewhere, carrying the exhaustion of someone who's been outrunning truth for years. The woman stands near the door, not quite inside, not quite outside. Her body suspended between realities the way her life has been. Her eyes are fixed on the shore, and you can feel something ancient stirring inside her. Something that resonates with the lament, as though the seals aren't calling to the sea at all, but to her specifically. The children cling to her legs, unusually quiet. You watch them tilt their heads at the same angle each time the cries shift pitch. It's synchronized, like the instinct isn't learned but inherited. Like they can hear more in those sounds than your human ears ever will. They aren't afraid, they're listening. You walk closer to the water, drawn to the sound even though every instinct says you should be cautious. The waves are gentler now, dragging themselves across the sand with a kind of slow sorrow. The beach feels like a place recovering from grief, not destruction. And as you move nearer to the water's edge, the lament grows more intricate, weaving in layers. A lower note, steady, resonant, like the hum of a cathedral ceiling. A higher one, thin and trembling, cracking around the edges. And between them, a chorus that swells and contracts with a rhythm that feels heartbreakingly intentional. You've heard human mourning. You've heard the quiet ache of someone saying goodbye. This sound is neither of those things. It goes deeper. It feels like the memory of loss, not the moment of it. A grief so old it's worn smooth by repetition. And that's when you understand. They're calling for the lost bride, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. The seals mourn her absence, their absence. They're calling to a missing member of their kin, one stolen out of their world by a decision made in desperation years ago. To you, she became a woman. To them, she was always something else. A sister, a daughter, a keeper of stories older than the island itself. And the chest hidden beneath the fisherman's floorboards is the reason she never came home. You feel the knowledge settle into you like cold water soaking through clothes. The seals aren't simply grieving, they're demanding. The storm was the first question. This lament is the second. Nature, it seems, prefers to ask loudly. The woman steps outside at last. She moves slowly, as if each footstep is reacquainting itself with the earth. Her dress clings damply from the storm's humidity, and her hair, dark and sea-thick, catches faint strands of morning light. She stands a few paces behind you, but the moment she arrives, the seal voices shift. The pitch changes, not softer, not louder, but clearer, like they're aligning themselves to a frequency only she can fully hear. Her eyes shine, not with tears. Humans cry. Selkies don't, not in the same way. Her shine is something deeper, a kind of awakening, the surfacing of a self she spent years pushing down. She lifts her chin toward the sea, and for the first time, she doesn't look divided between land and water. She looks claimed. The children follow her, but they stop at the line where wet sand turns dry. Their small faces reflect something conflicted, something they've never been taught, but somehow know that whatever is happening out there includes them, but also doesn't. They are of both worlds and neither. The lament belongs to a lineage they only half understand. The woman walks closer to the waves until the water brushes her ankles. The seals raise their voices in a sudden swell that hits you square in the chest, like an emotional rip current. You've never felt a sound physically before, but this one pushes into you, into all of you, like the ocean is knocking on your sternum from the inside. And then she answers, not with words. She's too ocean-born for that. Instead, she tilts her head, closes her eyes, and breathes in with the rhythm of the tide. Her entire presence responds, her stance, her stillness, her silence. You can feel it. She is speaking back in a language older than human mourning. The seals fall into a hush, every head turned toward her. The sea pauses. The world, for one impossible moment, aligns. And in that alignment, you hear it, the truth carried beneath the lament. She was never meant to stay. They were never meant to forget. And the sea does not forgive unfinished stories. The cries resume, softer now, but insistent. A plea for restoration, a call for something stolen to be returned. You stand beside the woman, the children behind her, the fisherman hidden in the shadows of the cottage, and you realize the tide has shifted in more ways than one. The seals know where she belongs. She knows where she belongs. Even the ocean knows. And whether the humans are ready or not, the sea has begun calling her home. You start noticing it in the quiet moments, the ones that slip between chores, between breaths, between the unspoken questions hanging in the cottage like fog that never quite lifts. It begins subtly, the way a tide begins far offshore before anyone on land realizes the coastline is already changing. At first, you think the woman is simply tired, the understandable aftermath of a storm that shook the sky in ways storms aren't supposed to. But the longer you watch her, the more you understand. This isn't fatigue. This is longing resurfacing like a creature that has been holding its breath for years. She moves differently now, not dramatically. Not enough for the fisherman to notice right away. But you notice. You always notice. Her steps are quieter. Not because she's trying to be quiet, but because her feet no longer feel fully at home on wood. Her hands linger a beat too long on surfaces, as though she's relearning texture, reminding herself what land feels like because something in her is preparing to let it go. And her eyes, those tide-pulled eyes that always seemed a little too deep for the life she was given, have begun to drift more frequently toward the sea. But it's her silence that changes the most. Before, her quiet felt like the kind people carry when they're rebuilding themselves. The kind that comes from new love, new routines, new worlds. A quiet that makes space. But now, her silence becomes something else. Denser, heavier, layered with all the things she isn't saying because she can't shape them into human language anymore. Her silence starts to sound like a heartbeat you can hear only when you press your ear against the ground. And the sea hears it too. Every morning the waves slide in with a kind of deliberate softness, like they're trying not to startle her. They curl around her ankles when she steps near the water, brushing against her like an affectionate animal recognizing one of its own. When she pauses on the beach, something she does more often now, the waves move and sink with her breath. You've never seen a shoreline behave so personally. The fisherman pretends not to see it, which is understandable. Denial is a powerful survival skill, especially for humans who sense the ending of something they desperately want to stay. He chops wood too loudly, mends nets that don't need mending, busies himself with the kind of frantic productivity that looks suspiciously like fear, wearing a workman's apron. Whenever the woman walks too close to the water, his shoulders tense, and you can almost hear his thoughts crackle like driftwood in a fire. He knows something is slipping, even if he doesn't admit it. But he can't compete with the ocean. No one can. The children sense it differently. They hover near her like small orbiting moons, their movements uncertain, their laughter thinner. They watch her with the uneasy wonder of creatures who feel a shift in gravity before the rest of the world catches up. Sometimes they mimic her distant looks toward the waves. Sometimes they stop mid-play for no reason, as though listening to a sound no one taught them to hear. You don't need anyone to explain it. You know instinct when you see it. And then there's the chest. The hidden thing beneath the floorboards has become the gravitational center of the entire cottage. Even though it remains closed, untouched, unsaid, the chest feels louder each day. Not literally. There's no rattling, no scratching, no ghostly tapping. But emotionally. Its presence grows like a pressure system, and the woman feels it most of all. When she walks by that quiet corner of the cottage, she tilts her head slightly, like she's hearing a faint hum, a pulse, a memory. You watch her slow each time she passes over that floorboard. She doesn't crouch or touch it or ask questions. She simply feels it. Her body recognizes something her mind refuses to fully acknowledge. And you realize that the chest isn't just a hidden object. It's a tether, a wound, a severed part of her identity pinned under wood and guilt. The longing intensifies at dusk each day. Twilight has always made her look slightly unreal, as though she's made of softer outlines than the rest of you. But recently, dusk wraps around her with startling familiarity, like two old friends greeting each other quietly. She stands on the shoreline in the fading light, her hair catching the wind in strands that look almost liquid, and she breathes differently. Longer inhales, shorter exhales, as though her lungs are remembering a tempo they once lived by. You stand with her once, just close enough to feel the temperature shift around her. The air near her is cooler, fresher. It smells faintly of kelp and deep water places far from this human cottage. And for the first time, you understand what she's fighting. It isn't the storm. It isn't the seals. It isn't even the truth buried in the chest. She's fighting the calling from the sea, a calling that has no decency, no patience, no sense of timing, just the raw certainty of something returning for what is its own. Her longing isn't dramatic or theatrical. It's quiet, painfully quiet. The kind of longing that sits in the ribs like low tide, exposing what's always been buried beneath the surface. She doesn't speak it aloud, but you can see it in the way her hands tremble when she touches cold water. You hear it in the way her breath catches at the distant sound of seals. You feel it in the way her gaze softens, not toward anything human, but toward the horizon. The fisherman eventually begins to notice what you've been witnessing for days. He doesn't speak it. He's too frightened of giving shape to a truth that might become solid the moment it's named. But his eyes follow her in the same way the tide follows the moon, helplessly, inevitably. And the children respond to all of it with a strange, intuitive sadness. They cling more, laugh less, and fall asleep curled around her like they're anchoring her to land. But longing makes its own rules. It moves through her like a tide rising slowly through the bones, returning not to break her life apart, but to remind her of the pieces she never truly left behind. You watch her one night as she stands barefoot at the edge of the sea. The waves lap at her feet, and she closes her eyes. For a moment, the moonlight hits her just right, and you see it, the shimmer beneath the human skin, the faint outline of another form waiting, pressing, calling. In that moment, you finally understand the truth that's been building through storms and songs and secrets. She isn't leaving because she wants to hurt anyone. She's leaving because she's being called home. Because longing, when it comes from the sea, is not desire. It's destiny. You feel it before you see it, like a shift in the air pressure, the kind that happens right before thunder decides to get dramatic. Except tonight there's no storm, no wind trying to rearrange your hairstyle for free, no moon ducking behind clouds for atmospheric effect. Just the coastline, stretching out in its usual quiet Scottish minimalism, and you standing there with the uneasy sense that something has finally circled back. For nights, no, honestly, for years, you've known this moment was out there somewhere. It walked behind the story like a shadow pretending not to be noticed. Every chapter, every tide, every guilt-soaked hesitation has been pointing here, to this shoreline where humans and selkies tend to collide and reshuffle the definition of belonging. And as you breathe in the salt-heavy dusk, you realize the sea feels strangely expectant, like it's holding a breath you didn't know water could hold. The fisherman hasn't come down to the shore yet, but you can feel him hovering in the narrative, the way exhaustion hovers after a long confession. You're not looking at him. He's somewhere behind you in that tired little house, probably sitting in a chair that groans in complaint every time he leans forward or backward, or simply continues to exist. But you can sense him. A man who knows a reckoning is walking toward him on soft feet, carrying something he's managed to avoid for years. Maybe he thought if he loved hard enough, or repented quietly enough, or convinced himself deeply enough, that his choice had been a kind one. The past would stay politely buried. But the sea never got that memo. The sea keeps receipts. It begins almost anticlimactically. You notice a shape near the dunes, half sunk in a tangle of kelp. Just a dark fold in the sand at first. Nothing dramatic, nothing glowing with destiny like a movie prop. But then you feel it again, that quiet internal recoil, the sensation of truth brushing against you. Your breath snags, the world sharpens, and the darkness resolves into something unmistakable. A seal skin, heavy with seawater and secrets. And suddenly, you understand why the ocean has been restless lately. You take a few unsteady steps forward, the sand giving way under your boots like it knows this moment deserves softness. Up close, the coat looks almost alive, glistening faintly, as though the tide hasn't fully withdrawn from it. You don't touch it, not because you're scared, but because something in you whispers that this isn't yours to touch. This is a life, a heart, a whole unfinished song. It's strange how ordinary it looks. Just a pelt, right? Just an object, technically speaking. But you remember the bride's gaze, the one that always seemed like she was listening to something you couldn't hear. You remember the children with their half-wild laughter. You remember the fisherman's shadowed eyes every time storms rolled in. And now, looking at the Selkie coat lying there like a truth the sea finally returned, you understand why the myth says stealing a seal skin is like stealing a soul. Because standing here you can feel it. This isn't clothing. This is essence, identity. A doorway she never stopped sensing, even when she didn't know why she felt split down the middle. You look back toward the house, and the lights flicker, the tired bulbs doing their best against the moisture. You picture the fisherman sitting inside, maybe with his hands pressed hard against his knees, as if bracing himself for a past self he can't unbe. Maybe he already feels it. Maybe he's known all day, the way pressure in the air warns you of storms before clouds gather. You wonder what it's like to live this long, knowing a single decision made in loneliness can shape the fate of an entire family. The coat doesn't move, but it feels like it's waiting. And with that realization comes a heavier one. You're not just witnessing the return of the Selkie skin. You're standing on the threshold of a choice you don't get to make, but you have to witness it anyway. You've been with this story too long to pretend you can stay neutral. Your heartbeat betrays you with every step you take toward the house. When you finally pick up the coat, you do it gently, as if afraid it will melt. The fur is cool and strangely resilient, like it remembers tides that would snap trees in half. Sand shifts off it in quiet little cascades, and as you lift it fully, it drapes over your arms with the weight of a life paused mid-sentence. Carrying it feels like walking with a truth you had no right to find. The path to the fisherman's door feels longer than usual. Even the boards of the porch seem to creak more reluctantly, like they're aware of the symbolism, and frankly not thrilled about being part of it. When you step inside, the room is dim and quiet. Too quiet, like the house itself is holding its breath. The fisherman lifts his head. He doesn't need to ask what you're holding. His face folds inward, slow and exhausted, like a man who just realized the tide he's outrun for years has finally tapped him on the shoulder. You can almost feel the confession he never gave rising in him like old, bitter foam. You don't need his words. You're past words now. This moment is older than language anyway. You set the coat down on the table. You don't need to theatrically reveal it. The truth sits loudly on its own. The fisherman stares at it with eyes that seem to age by decades in a heartbeat. You see guilt, yes, but also love and fear, and a kind of surrender that isn't defeat so much as recognition. The recognition that a wrong, even when committed out of loneliness, doesn't stop being a wrong. And sometimes the only thing left is to let fate rethread itself. You realize you can't decide what this coat means. Not for him, not for her, not for their children. It is all those things at once. A confession, a key, a wound, a homecoming. You are only the witness, the one who has walked the shoreline long enough to understand that the ocean never forgets what belongs to it. Still, you feel the weight of responsibility settling on you. Not because you must choose the path, but because you must hand the moment over untouched. You're the keeper of the transition, not the decision. Outside, the tide sighs against the rocks. Inside, the fisherman finally exhales, sounding like a man who has loved deeply and wrongly, and is about to lose both in the same heartbeat. You step back from the table. The coat gleams faintly in the lamplight, as though the sea itself is remembering her. And you know, absolutely know, that nothing in this story will stay the same after tonight. You stand on the cold edge of the shoreline, the kind of cold that doesn't simply brush past you but reaches under your coat like it has every legal right to check your ribs. The tide is breathing in long, deliberate pulls, as though the ocean is preparing for something it has already decided but hasn't bothered to announce. And you, small, mortal, undeniably breakable, find yourself caught between two forces so old they make the cliffs look like toddlers learning to walk. The air tonight feels staged, like nature pressed the pause button on everything except what's about to unfold. Even the gulls, notoriously loud-mouthed creatures, circle in restrained silence, as if the sky itself issued a memo telling them to be on their best behavior. You can feel that silence wrapping around you, expectant, like it knows you are witnessing a decision that doesn't need your permission, your blessing, or even your understanding. She stands there, not quite of the sea, not quite of the land, but weighed down by something more potent than grief. Not sadness, not resignation. Something deeper, older. The kind of inevitability that sits at the bottom of myths and waits. Her footprints in the sand look too temporary, as if the waves are already rehearsing erasing them. She's not moving, not speaking, not signaling anything you can interpret with the logic you use for everyday life. And yet, you know she's listening to the horizon, to the wind, to that pulsing ache at the center of her existence that has only ever pointed one way. Behind her, the fisherman stands like a figure carved by a storm, weathered, unsteady, bearing a kind of tension that comes from knowing you've run out of bargaining chips. His presence doesn't shift the scene. It barely registers in the great arrangement of what's coming. You watch the way his hands tremble, but there's nothing he can say, nothing he can offer, no gesture with enough weight to tilt the scales back toward him. You can almost feel his desperate math. Love multiplied by years shared, divided by a fate he pretended wasn't real. And still, the answer turns out the same every time. He isn't the one who gets to choose. The children linger near him, caught between wonder and fear. They clutch at his coat, as if holding him could anchor them against the tidal pull that isn't dragging their bodies, but is absolutely dragging their world. You notice how their eyes echo hers, not in shape, but in some internal shimmer, like they've inherited a tide that never fully belonged to land. Their breath catches every time she shifts, even slightly, like they're afraid she'll dissolve into salt and spray at the slightest mistake. And you're the one stuck holding the awareness of all of it. You feel the weight of the coat, hidden no longer, its presence humming with the memory of every life it ever shaped. You feel the tension in the sand under your boots, as if even the earth is bracing. You feel the ocean tightening its grip on the moment, ready to reclaim what was always, quite literally, its own. All the human arguments, the ones you'd usually expect in a moment like this, don't even bother showing up. There's no plea for her to stay, for love. No desperate declaration that she belongs here. No romantic monologue about a family built on borrowed time. None of that would matter, and every living thing on this shore knows it. This isn't a story where emotion gets to override destiny. It's the kind where destiny doesn't even slow down long enough to make eye contact. You watch her shoulders rise and fall with a single deep breath. It feels like the breath of someone standing on a threshold, one that's more concept than physical place. She doesn't turn back. She doesn't need to. Just existing in this moment is enough to prove she's already halfway gone, even though her feet are still planted on the sand. The children inch forward, not enough to reach her, just enough to make your chest tighten. They don't know what to ask, or whether asking even makes sense anymore. They only know the pull, the gentle, aching, inevitable pull towards something they can't name but feel in their bones. The wind picks up, carrying the scent of seaweed and storms, and something else you can't recognize, some deep water truth slipping through the cracks of the world. It brushes past you like a whisper, but not one meant for you. It's aimed at her, threading its way around her form like recognition, like invitation. She finally moves. Not a dramatic step, not a cinematic turn, just a subtle shift of weight that signals the tide inside her is already chosen. It's not a decision made through thought or emotion. It's muscle memory embedded in the soul. The kind of instinct older than names, older than promises, older than every fragile human attempt to build permanence on shifting sand. You feel your throat tighten as you watch the fisherman collapse inward, not physically, but emotionally, the way a cliff might crumble in slow motion. He isn't surprised. That's the thing. painful truths rarely surprise the people who've carried them for years. His face holds no anger, only the exhaustion of a man realizing the future he built was always on loan. There's no ceremony to what happens next, no dramatic parting of clouds, no choir of waves, just the simple understanding that the moment has arrived and it obeys no one. Not him, not the children, not even her. It's as if the ocean itself has reached out an invisible hand, not to command, but to resume. And you, standing there, human and helpless, finally understand the part of the myth no one tells in folk tales. It's not that she chose the sea over the land. It's not that the sea chose her. It's that some destinies aren't choices at all. They're tides, and tides go where they must. You arrive at the shoreline before dawn, the sky still holding on to its last shades of blue, like someone refusing to let go of a warm blanket. The world is quiet in that soft, temporary way that always feels like a held breath. Nothing moving except the slow exhale of tide against rock. You step closer, feeling the sand cold and damp beneath your shoes, and you know, today is the day. Not because anyone told you, and not because a prophecy popped out of sea foam with a flourish, but because the ocean has been humming with an energy you can feel in your ribs. Something is shifting. Something is returning. She stands a little ahead of you, near the place where the waves drag long ribbons of kelp across the shore. She looks like someone who has already crossed a line you can't quite see. Her body's still here, but her presence halfway somewhere else. Over the past days, you've watched her soften, focus, drift, and sharpen, like she's cycling between tides of herself. The coat sits folded over her arm now, heavier than anything made of skin or fur should ever look. It weighs on her like a truth finally spoken aloud. You notice how her posture leans subtly toward the water, like gravity isn't working normally for her anymore, as if her center of mass is no longer in her body, but somewhere beneath the surf. And you realize this moment was always waiting for her. No matter how many years she lived on land, no matter how many fires she lit, or children she raised, or memories stitched themselves into her days, the sea was never finished with her. The waves have been whispering her name in a language you can't hear, but she can. You walk slowly, keeping a distance that feels respectful in a way you cannot articulate. She does not turn to you, but you sense she knows you're there. The ground feels alive, vibrating with some old pulse running between her and the ocean. Even the gulls avoid flying overhead, circling farther out as if they've been told to give this place space. The air smells sharper today, briny with that deep water scent that only rolls in when the sea wants to make a point. You look at her silhouette against the breaking light, her hair pulled by the wind toward the water, the coat pressed to her side like a heart she's finally recovered. You think of the years she spent inland, her eyes always drifting toward the horizon, like she was watching for something she wasn't sure she wanted to find. You think of the fisherman who once hid this same coat away, thinking he was securing a life for himself. But some things cannot be held without consequence, just like some stories cannot be told without salt. She steps forward, not dramatically, no slow motion grandeur, no theatrical pause, just naturally, like a woman walking into her own home after a long shift, tired and relieved at the same time. The waves meet her ankles, swirling like familiar hands welcoming her back. You watch her breathe, deeper than you've ever seen her breathe on land, as if her lungs have been half awake for years. The ocean brightens around her, not literally glowing, but gathering itself, pulling currents closer, tightening surface tension, making everything feel suddenly aware. And you realize you're witnessing a reunion that was never meant for human eyes. But you ended up here anyway, standing like someone who showed up early to a private ceremony and couldn't quite convince themselves to leave. She holds the coat in both hands, and you see her fingers tremble, not with fear, but with something older, recognition, relief, destiny, words that feel dramatic in any other setting, but feel effortless here. She raises the coat slightly, letting the wind slide through the fur one last time. Then she presses it to herself, not putting it on yet, just holding it like someone greeting an old friend after decades apart. When she finally drapes it over her shoulders, it doesn't look like clothing. It looks like gravity shifting around her, like the world remembering the version of her it knew first. The transformation is subtle. No flashy sparkles or mystical whirlwinds, just the quiet, certain realignment of a being returning to the right shape. Her posture adjusts, her breathing steadies, and her body seems to blur at the edges, as if the boundary between her and the water has stopped being a rule. Another step forward. The sea reaches higher, folding around her calves, her knees, her waist. She keeps walking, and even though you know she will be swallowed soon, she never looks like someone disappearing. She looks like someone becoming. When the water lifts her off her feet, carrying her weight with gentle insistence, you brace yourself for sadness, for grief, for the heartbreak you assumed would accompany this moment. But you don't feel any of it. What you feel instead is rightness, like watching a migrating bird finally catch the wind that's meant for it. Her form dips beneath a wave, and for a heartbeat, she's gone. Then the wave rolls back, and where she once stood, a sleek body arcs upward, dark and glistening, water shedding like diamonds. A seal, no, the seal, twists through the surf with a familiarity that makes your breath hitch. She dives again, swimming with the kind of grace that land could never offer her. She does not look back, and she shouldn't. You stand alone on the shore as dawn finally breaks open, and the light spills over everything with an almost too gentle mercy. The tide swirls at your feet, cool and curious, as if checking whether you understand what you just witnessed. You do. The ocean doesn't steal. It reclaims. And as the seal's silhouette moves farther into the endless blue, you realize you haven't just seen her return to the sea. You've seen the sea return to itself. You'd think the shoreline would quiet down once the sea takes back what once belonged to it, but instead, the coast becomes louder in strange, uneven ways. Like someone turned up the volume on the parts of life people usually try to ignore. You stand there long after she has slipped beneath the surface, after the foam has folded over itself like a blanket, tucking her return into secrecy. What remains isn't just absence. It's something weightier, like a memory that refuses to fade, no matter how many tides drag themselves over the sand. You can almost feel the village shifting around you, trying to decide whether to treat what happened as myth, tragedy, or just another piece of weather they'll complain about over breakfast. The fisherman walks differently now. You notice this before anything else. How his shoulders tilt as if he's trying to find a way to carry something that refuses to be carried. He doesn't talk to you. He barely talks to anyone. But you can read him the way you read shoreline debris after a storm. You can tell what's driftwood, what's broken, what's still raw enough to splinter. He moves through the village like he's hunting for chores just to quiet the noise inside him. Fixing nets, repairing boats, scrubbing things that probably don't need scrubbing. Every gesture has the shape of regret, like he's trying to erase footprints on a beach, even though the next wave is already coming. And the children, well, they're the part of the story the tide couldn't wash clean. You watch them running along the beach with that strange mixture of wildness and softness that always felt a bit borrowed from the ocean. Now, without her here, the difference is sharper. There's a brightness in their eyes that comes and goes like quicksilver, like they're catching glimpses of something only they can see. Sometimes, when they stare out across the gray expanse of water, you get the feeling they aren't looking for their mother so much as listening for her, as though sound travels differently for them, opening doors you can't hear. The villagers pretend not to notice. Humans are excellent at pretending when the truth feels too heavy to carry home. The story spreads, of course. Small towns are basically gossip wrapped in weather, but it spreads in the way of things people want to believe and fear at the same time. Some say the woman was a spirit returning to her realm. Others whisper that the fisherman's wife simply ran off and drowned, which somehow feels more comforting to them, even though it's far more tragic. You hear theories layered like sediment, versions that soften the edges, versions that sharpen them, versions that blame the sea or fate or the fisherman himself. But no matter which version they choose, everyone begins to treat the ocean differently. Kids don't skip stones quite as far as they used to. Old sailors glance at the waves like they're reading warnings. Even tourists, those cheerful, oblivious types who arrive with maps and optimism, sense something is off, though they don't know what. They take photos of the water anyway, capturing the surface without understanding the story stretching beneath it. As for you, the coastline feels changed in ways you can't fully name. You try to walk the usual paths, the ones you've traced since the start of this strange journey, but every step carries a faint echo. You can't unsee what you witnessed. The way she slipped into the waves with a grace that belonged entirely to itself. The way the wind seemed to quiet as if trying to honor the moment. Now the world feels bigger, more complex, and slightly tilted, as though the myth cracked open a seam in the everyday landscape, and something ancient is still leaking out. Sometimes at night, when the waves roll in with that slow, steady hush, almost like breathing, you imagine you can still feel her presence at the edge of the tide. Not in a ghostly way, but in the sense that returning to one's true place leaves impressions the same way bodies leave warmth in a chair after they stand up. The sea feels fuller now, more alive. You can sense the difference the same way you sense when a story isn't finished, even though the narrator swears it is. The fisherman's world rearranges itself piece by piece. He takes the children on his boat more often, as if trying to connect them to the part of their lives he never understood well enough. You watch him point at gulls, at distant hills, at shifting cloud shapes, as though naming things might help him make sense of what can't be named. The kids listen. They always listen. But sometimes you see them touch the water with their fingertips, lingering in a way that makes you wonder whether the ocean is whispering to them in a language humans weren't designed to translate. In the village, life goes on with that stubborn, almost admirable persistence humans rely on whenever the world gets too strange. People tend their gardens, boats go out and return, markets open, fires are lit. And yet beneath all those ordinary rhythms, something has settled, like a thin layer of salt dusting everything. A reminder, subtle but unshakable, that the line between human and myth isn't as sealed as the world likes to pretend. The coastline becomes a kind of museum of echoes. You walk past tidal pools and swear you see movement that doesn't belong to crabs or small fish. You hear seals barking offshore with a tone that feels almost familiar, almost shaped like yearning. The wind carries fragments of stories that the village never quite manages to silence. You stand in the middle of it all, knowing you aren't just witnessing aftermath, you're witnessing continuation. Because the sea didn't take her away. Not really. It took her back. And everything left behind is still rearranging itself around that truth. You realize, standing at the edge where wet sand darkens into shining black, that the ocean never gives back what it takes in the same form. It transforms people, towns, memories. It reshapes coastlines and inner landscapes alike. And in this small Scottish village, the legacy of the Selkie bride lingers like a tide that refuses to recede, touching everything, changing nothing completely yet, altering everything just enough. You look toward the horizon, knowing the story isn't finished. Not for the fisherman, not for the children, not for the village, and not for you. After all, echoes only fade if nothing answers them, and the sea always answers. Years pass the way tides do, quiet from afar, relentless up close. You don't really notice the years stacking on each other until your knees complain on rainy mornings, or until the sea starts greeting you like an old friend who knows where you've hidden all your secrets. By then, it's too late to pretend you haven't been changed. And the story, her story, keeps surfacing no matter how many layers of routine and adulthood you pile on top of it. It's like a grain of salt stuck under your tongue, refusing to dissolve, insisting on being remembered. People in the village talk less now, or maybe you just hear them differently. The fishermen who once rolled their eyes at legends now tell them with the same tone they use when talking about winter storms. Something real, something that happens to someone, somewhere, whether or not you were looking. Even the newer folks, the ones who came here because they wanted a seaside cottage with character, eventually learn the tale. They hear it from neighbors, or from children skipping stones, or from the ocean itself, because the ocean has never been shy about repeating things. You don't retell it often, but when you do, it never comes out the same way twice. Sometimes the story leans towards sorrow, like a tide that's been dragged out too far. Other times, it feels strangely triumphant, a reminder that not everything beautiful is meant to belong to land-bound hands. You've tried to understand why the story keeps reshaping itself like weather over the cliffs. But maybe that's the point. Stories breathe, even when their characters don't walk the shore anymore. The children of the village, some of whom are descendants of those tide-touched kids, play games inspired by the tale without even realizing it. They race along the shoreline pretending to transform into seals, dive under waves as though salt water is a second home, and tease each other with the idea that they might disappear into the ocean one day. There's no fear in their voices, only wonder, like the myth became less warning and more inheritance. You watch them sometimes, standing on the same cold stones where you once tried to piece together what was human, what was ocean, and what fell somewhere between. The fisherman, older now, carrying the weight of choices he made long ago, still walks the coastline at dawn. He doesn't look like a man haunted, more like someone who has finally accepted that guilt and love can exist side by side without canceling each other out. People say he speaks to the waves, though you've never heard him. Maybe he's asking for forgiveness. Maybe he's offering it. Maybe he's just talking because the ocean has always been the one place where no one interrupts. What you remember most isn't the drama or the tragedy, though both were part of the current that carried everything. What sticks with you is the quietness of it all, the way her presence felt like standing at the edge of something impossibly ancient, the way the air changed when she looked toward the water, the way you understood, even then, that some stories don't end so much as settle into the landscape. There are evenings when the sea goes unnervingly still, the horizon sharpening into a blade of silver. On those nights, you swear you see shapes gliding just beneath the surface. Not threatening, not even mysterious, just familiar in a way you can't explain to anyone who wasn't there. Something in you lifts, almost like recognition, almost like greeting. And for one brief, impossible second, you think the ocean remembers you too. People ask why the legend refuses to fade the way most coastal tales do. You don't have an answer, at least not one that fits neatly into a sentence. The truth is that the story isn't just something that happened, it's something that keeps happening, reshaping itself like the coastline after every storm. It lives in the way the town faces the sea with both caution and tenderness. It lives in the way parents watch their children dive under the waves without fear. It lives in the way the wind sometimes sounds like it's carrying a memory too old to name. And of course, it lives in you, because every time the tide rolls in, it brings back a little of what it once took. Sand, driftwood, kelp, forgotten things. And you wonder if memory works the same way. Maybe that's why you still catch yourself watching the horizon with that same restless curiosity you had years ago, waiting for a silhouette that once walked between worlds. You don't expect her to return. That's not how these stories work. But you also know the ocean isn't in the business of erasing anything. It keeps everything, even the things that no longer belong to it. So you walk the beach when the world gets too loud, letting the salt air untangle your thoughts. You let the waves wash over your toes, even when the water is cold enough to make your bones complain. You listen, not for voices, not for closure, but for the kind of truth the sea tells without using words. It's a truth that doesn't fit in books or local lore or whispered retellings. It's the truth you carry in your chest like a tide that never quite goes out. Eventually, you realize the story didn't change you by accident. It chose you the way certain places choose their weather, the way certain nights choose their stars. And now, whenever you hear someone mention selkies or sea brides or impossible choices, you feel that small shift inside. The tug, the pull, the reminder. A quiet voice made of salt and wind saying, "You were there. You saw it." And the ocean never forgets those who witness its keeping. So you tell the story when asked, letting it drift from your mouth like sea spray. Soft, steady, inevitable. You don't embellish. You don't downplay. You simply let it move the way the tide does. And as people listen, some wide-eyed, some skeptical, some already halfway pulled into the myth, you feel the same old stir in your chest. Because the legend of the Selkie bride isn't just something Scotland remembers. It's something you remember. And that memory, salty and stubborn and shining at the edges, will follow you for the rest of your days, gentle as a lullaby, vast as the tide, and patient as the sea that taught you how to listen. Drift now into sleep, letting the ocean's memory cradle you as your mind floats effortlessly into dream. Good night.